While shepherds watched their flocks by night, all seated on the ground, all seated on the ground, the angel of the Lord.
Okay, Robin, we're here for Purbeck Coast with a particularly Purbeck-friendly story.
Oh, right, yes.
Take us back in history.
Oh, right. We're in the Square and Compass, up in Worth-Matravers. And Worth-Matravers, well, not just Worth, but Langton and Kingston, or Acton, the whole area, this little community, had its own carols. In fact, there are 8 recorded, plus a couple more that we know were sung here, but they're entirely different from the carols we know. And they stem back a long, long time. Back in the 50s, a local lady, Sybil Shepherd, whose family went back a long way in Worth, she decided to try and rescue them before they disappeared. And there was still a fiddler from the Langton band, a chap called Harold Bower, who played the fiddle. And Sybil Shepherd used to get her eggs from him. And so she used to, every Saturday, get him to come along and play a little bit of the carols. He was quite old at the time and could only play a few bars at a time. But over time, she recorded the tunes of these 8 carols. And then, with the memories of singing them herself as a child, rearranged them as they would have been sung in 4 parts. And then, with the help of her son, who was in publishing, Roger Shepherd, who still lives in Langton, in fact in Sybil's house, where we used to visit her back in the, over 30 years ago now, he still lives there. So these carols were, as I say, sung just locally. They are completely different from the ones that we know of in church and familiar with. And so they were sung, as I say, just in Langton and Worth, around the village. I assume we don't really know a lot about them. They probably weren't sung in here, because the people who they're attributed to,
teetotal, weren't they?
George and John Corbin, in fact, were teetotalers, or so we believe, and belonged to the local chapel. John played the double bass,
yes,
and George the fiddle, as I say. So the 4 parts were played traditionally in these sort of bands that used to play the church music before hymns, ancient and modern, came in 1861, I think it was. They each village would have its own church band, and they would select the tunes to the psalms or the hymns that were sung. But of course, up until that sort of time, before the nonconformists really got going, there were no hymns or carols sung in church, apart perhaps from While Shepherds Watched,
right,
which there is a version from here in Worth, and which is a great version. I sing bass, and the bass is in the Purbeck Village Choir, of which I'm a member. Just love the Worth version of While Shepherds Watched. But every village, every town had its own version of While Shepherds Watched. In fact, there are over 400 recorded versions of it. I was just up in Yorkshire for the Festival of Village Carols recently, and one village up there, I think it's pronounced Fulo, has 8 different versions of While Shepherds Watched. Different arrangements of the words and the like. So there are lots and lots of versions set to all sorts of tunes, including a tune that was written in Kent that is called Canterbury. I think it's Canterbury, which is in fact better known because up in Yorkshire they pinched it for some dreadful song about Ilkley Moor.
Of course, yes.
So, as I say, Shepherd's Watch, it's a glorious version of the one here in Worth, and we love singing it.
And you're not a churchman, are you?
No, I'm not religious at all. My interest stemmed from really an obsession with traditional folk music, which I sort of had from late teens really, and I got very involved and very keen on the social side of folk music, which it can wonderfully illustrate, whether it's rural folk or their lives, so the social history of farm labourers, for instance, or whether it's sailors. And during some research, I think before I was 20, in fact, I came across a book by in Bournemouth's music library, which was written by a chap called Pickard Cambridge, and he had collected lots of old band manuscripts, which included this music and these settings, and came across these carols, which were, as I say, very particular to Worth. Although versions of them are found all over the country, the tune that we use here in Purbeck for While Shepherds Watched, or one of the tunes really, because Lulworth have got two different tunes for While Shepherds Watched, for instance. It's found up in Yorkshire. Another of the tunes was actually a tune pinched from Corelli,
yes,
just as we pinched Hark the Herald, a version of Hark the Herald from Mendelssohn, who didn't actually approve of it being used for Hark the Herald. And the other interesting fact about Hark the Herald is that the Wesleys objected to people messing about with their words as well.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a very interesting article by John Wesley saying that he wished people would not acknowledge at least the origin of the words, and that they could then not be blamed for other men's doggerel, as he put it.
Excellent. And a changing career as a result of folk music.
Yes, it certainly influenced me. I was working in factories and not enjoying working, and then some idiot farmer up in North Dorset gave me a job on the farm. Brilliant. And so I was working in agriculture for some time, and then eventually moved over into conservation. So as I say,
you were the ranger at Dalston, weren't you?
I was for 21 odd years a ranger at Dalston Country Park. Yes, so which when I got the job there, I thought this all comes together really, because my interest in the social history, and obviously that meant I was interested in plants and how the land was worked.
Stone walling, I love so much.
Yes, stone walling, another skill that is very much a part of that hedge laying. So yes, it all gelled together really, and yes, and what was really useful, and perhaps why I got a job at Dalston, is that from a farming background and my, as I say, interest in rural affairs and how the landscape was managed in the past, because that's how, for conservation's sake, you need to manage grasslands now for
trample it down.
And grazing as well is very important.
We had a fascinating conversation with the National Trust where they're encouraging people to trample on the dunes now, because the equivalent of the cattle doing that was an important part of the cycle of the dunes.
Well, the way these habitats were managed is what helped create them, and grasslands are a central part of that. If they're not grazed, then they will disappear into scrub. So so that's all part of it.
So Robin Plowman, thank you. How do we find out more about the Purbeck Village Quire?
Oh right. Well, Purbeck Village Quire has been running for 30 odd years. In fact, we started because I suggested to a gentleman called Rollo Woods,
Yes.
who had retired to Swanage. When he left he was a librarian at Southampton University. He, again, was a folk musician, played the concertina, and very interested in the West Gallery carols. We ought to talk about the West Gallery and why they're called West Gallery. But anyway, let's carry on with Rollo's story. His parents lived in Widdicombe, and the next door neighbour gave him a load of manuscripts. Music manuscripts, which were the Widdicombe carols, and he became quite excited by this and became interested in these old church bands, which really ran from 1740-ish through to 1860, when hymns ancient and modern came in. Then he, and with the help of a clergyman up in Winchester, they actually had a session and actually sang some of these carols in Winchester Cathedral.
Good, thanks a lot.
And anyway, he retired to Swanage and then started doing research. Initially, he got a lot of folk musicians together to celebrate a centenary, I think, of Hardy. I can't remember which one it was, because of course the Hardy family,
As in Thomas Hardy.
Thomas Hardy, the author, yes, Thomas Hardy actually played the fiddle himself, and his father and grandfather played the fiddle, and they were part of the bands at Stinsford and Puddletown, and they were part of one of these West Gallery bands. West Gallery because that's where the musicians sat and played from.
Literally the West Gallery in a church.
The West Gallery in the church, yes. So, but as I say, they played, and we've got a wonderful account of how they worked and the characters involved from Thomas Hardy. In particular, the early novel Under the Greenwood Tree gives wonderful insights into how these bands worked and their culture, and going the rounds, which is coming back to why I'm interested in it, because the carols were sung around the villages, around the visiting each house in turn. Many places they would not start singing carols until midnight on Christmas Day. In fact, one of the villages in the Peaks, where the chapel there, I think it's called Fulo, it's very near Eyam, in fact spitting distance from Eyam, which has a completely different repertoire of carols.
Yes, yeah.
But the Fulo Carolers only sing on Christmas Day. They have about 25 different carols, including 8 versions of While Shepherds Watched, and they go out on Christmas Day around the village. They used to do a night sing, which is what is illustrated in Under the Greenwood Tree, the first chapters of that, and visit each house in turn. And there's some lovely accounts of children being woken up at 4 o'clock in the morning to hear their carol, which the carolers sang under their window, and that to them was Christmas. That's when Christmas started. Yeah.
A couple of things to finish. You're going to tell me you get dressed up now?
We do. The Purbeck Village Choir are a costume choir, and we do dress up in period costume of the time, or approximately the costumes of the time. Some choirs don't do that, and many of the choirs, what's called the West Gallery choirs, are revival choirs, and unlike myself, they have a wider interest in the church music.
Yes.
Whereas I'm only sing at Christmas with Purbeck Village Choir. So it's the caroling, the going the rounds that I am interested in.
And wassailing.
Oh, wassailing as well, yes. In fact, next year I was hoping to gather some more local people, because Purbeck Village Choir have been singing the Worth carols on and off for 30 years. I was hoping to gather some local people and re-establish a carol party to go round.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we go out at midnight on Christmas Day and sing till 7 o'clock in the morning.
You sing at 4 a.m. under my window, you might get a bit of feedback.
Yes, we might not. A lot of carols start awake, arise. This is the morning. So, but some people still do it, including a group in America.
Yeah.
In Massachusetts, the Glen Rock Carolers, who still go out at midnight, and they sing for 7 hours around every dwelling in Glen Rock. And in fact, they came over to Yorkshire to the Festival of Carols this December. So it was great to see them.